this episode, we're going to talk about denial of service, which is the security idea of preventing a system from being available when people need it, and we're going to apply it specifically to AI systems. For beginners, it can be tempting to think that denial of service is only about flooding a website with traffic until it crashes. That is part of it, but AI introduces new twists because models can be expensive to run, and the cost of a request can vary dramatically depending on what the user asks. An attacker does not always need a huge botnet if they can craft requests that are unusually costly, especially if your system is designed to be helpful and to produce long, complex outputs. This is where the ideas of model DoS and cost bombs come in. Model DoS is any attempt to overload the model service so it becomes slow or unavailable, and a cost bomb is a pattern of requests designed to drive up compute usage and bills while degrading service. Handling these risks is not just a matter of adding more servers. It is about understanding what makes model workloads expensive, setting sensible limits, and designing resilience so the system fails gracefully rather than catastrophically. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good starting point is to understand why AI systems are attractive targets for denial of service. Traditional web requests often have fairly predictable cost. Serving a page or returning a record takes roughly similar effort each time. With AI, the workload can vary because generating long outputs takes more computation and processing long inputs takes more memory and time. If your system allows very large prompts, an attacker can send huge inputs that force expensive processing, even if they are meaningless. If your system allows very long responses, an attacker can request extreme output length, forcing the model to spend significant compute generating tokens. If your system uses retrieval, the request might trigger extra database queries, embedding calculations, or document processing. If your system calls tools, a single user request might trigger multiple downstream calls, multiplying workload. Beginners should see that the attack surface includes not only traffic volume, but also request complexity. A well-designed attacker will aim for maximum resource consumption per request. That is why AI denial of service can be effective even at moderate request rates. Model DoS can take multiple forms, and it helps to name a few high-level patterns. One pattern is volume flooding, where the attacker simply sends many requests to overwhelm capacity, which is similar to classic denial of service. Another pattern is input bloat, where the attacker sends extremely long prompts, often filled with junk, to consume context processing resources. Another pattern is output bloat, where the attacker requests extremely long responses, especially if your system tries to be helpful and never wants to stop. Another pattern is tool call amplification, where the attacker crafts prompts that cause the model to call external tools repeatedly, turning one request into many backend actions. Another pattern is adversarial looping, where the system's own design creates repeated retries or self-correction steps that can be exploited to keep it busy. Beginners do not need to memorize patterns as a list, but they should understand the general idea. Denial of service is about exhausting a finite resource, and in AI those resources include compute, memory, tokens, tool budgets, and downstream services. When you know what can be exhausted, you can design limits that protect the system. Cost bombs deserve special attention because they are a form of economic attack. Even if your service stays up, an attacker might aim to make it so expensive that you are forced to shut it down or restrict it. This can happen when billing is tied to token usage, compute time, or tool calls. An attacker can create prompts that reliably maximize token consumption, such as repeatedly requesting large outputs, requesting multiple rewrites, or asking for complex transformations that expand text length. They can also automate these requests across multiple accounts or free trial pathways. In systems that offer generous usage limits, cost bombs can exploit that generosity. Beginners should see that this is similar to fraudulent charges in other contexts. The attacker is draining resources rather than stealing a physical object. The damage is real because it can force you to reduce service for legitimate users. Cost bombs are particularly dangerous because they can be disguised as legitimate heavy usage. The difference is often in patterns, repeated maximum length requests, unusual timing, and a lack of normal user behavior like reading and responding. Resilience is the broader concept of keeping the system useful even under stress, and it includes both prevention and graceful degradation. Prevention includes controls that stop abusive requests, but resilience also means you have a plan for what happens when limits are reached. For example, instead of the entire service failing, you might return shorter responses, reduce model size, disable high-cost features, or prioritize critical users. This idea is common in engineering. When resources are scarce, you shed non-essential load. In AI systems, that might mean temporarily turning off certain expensive capabilities, such as long context processing or tool augmentation, while keeping basic assistance available. Beginners should understand that resilience is not the same as perfection. You may not be able to prevent every denial of service attempt, but you can design the system so that it remains partially functional and recoverable. Resilient design includes monitoring, automated protections, and human runbooks for escalation. When resilience is planned, the system behaves predictably under attack instead of collapsing unpredictably. One of the most effective defenses is setting sensible limits on inputs and outputs, because these limits directly constrain the attacker's ability to create expensive workloads. Limiting maximum prompt length prevents input bloat from consuming unlimited resources. Limiting maximum output length prevents output bloat and reduces cost bombs. These limits should be paired with user experience decisions, such as providing partial answers with an option to request more, rather than always attempting to generate the maximum. Beginners might worry that limits reduce usefulness, but limits can actually improve reliability because they prevent a few extreme requests from harming everyone. Another important limit is timeouts, where the system stops processing requests that take too long. Timeouts protect capacity and prevent long-running requests from accumulating. In addition, you can limit the number of tool calls a single request can trigger, preventing amplification. The security principle here is bounds checking. You never let untrusted input define unbounded work. That principle shows up in many secure systems, and it applies strongly to AI. Rate limiting and quota management are also central defenses, because even bounded requests can add up if they come in large numbers. Rate limits restrict how many requests an identity can make in a time window, and quotas restrict total usage over a longer period. The key is to apply these limits in a way that matches risk. You might allow higher limits for trusted internal users and lower limits for anonymous or new accounts. You might apply stricter limits to expensive endpoints or long context features. You might also implement dynamic limits that tighten when the system is under stress. Beginners should see that this is a fairness problem. You want to protect many legitimate users from being crowded out by a few abusive ones. Rate limiting is also a detection tool, because abnormal usage patterns are often the earliest sign of an attack. When you see a spike, you can investigate and adjust. This is why good telemetry and alerting matter. Limits are effective only if you can see how they are being used and whether they are being evaded. Another important resilience concept is prioritization, which is how you decide who gets service when capacity is limited. In many systems, you prioritize based on authentication, subscription level, or criticality of the workflow. In security contexts, you might prioritize incident response use cases over casual experimentation. You might also prioritize shorter requests because they allow the system to serve more users. Prioritization can be implemented through queuing, where requests wait in line and are processed based on priority rather than simply first come. Beginners should understand that queuing is a controlled way to manage load. Without queuing, the system may thrash, where it tries to handle too much at once and becomes unstable. With queuing, the system can remain stable, even if some users experience delays. Prioritization should also be transparent in policy, because users need to know what to expect. A predictable slowdown is better than a sudden crash. A subtle but important defense is detecting expensive requests before fully processing them. If you can estimate cost early, you can reject or modify requests that would exceed policy. For example, if a prompt is extremely long, you can refuse it or ask for a shorter version before running the model. If a user asks for an extremely long output, You can cap it and explain that the response will be shorter. If a prompt appears to be structured to cause tool call loops, you can block tool usage for that request. This kind of pre-check reduces wasted compute and helps protect capacity. Beginners should connect this to everyday security checks like input validation. You validate early to prevent downstream harm. In AI systems, validation includes size checks, complexity heuristics, and policy checks. It can also include user reputation signals, such as whether an account has a history of normal usage or suspicious patterns. The goal is to spend the least resources possible deciding whether to spend more resources. That is the economic logic of resilient design. Because AI systems often depend on other services, resilience also means protecting downstream dependencies from being overwhelmed. If the model triggers retrieval queries, you need to ensure retrieval does not become the bottleneck. If the model can call external tools, you need to ensure tool calls are rate-limited and sandboxed so that one user cannot overload a third-party system or your own internal services. This is where circuit breakers come in, conceptually. When a dependency is failing or overloaded, the system temporarily stops calling it and returns a degraded response. Beginners can think of this like an electrical circuit breaker that prevents a house fire by cutting power when current is too high. In AI systems, a circuit breaker might disable tool augmentation when the tool's service is down, rather than letting requests pile up and time out. This keeps the overall system more stable. Resilience is about controlling cascades, because denial of service can spread through interconnected components if you let failures propagate unchecked. Finally, handling denial of service risk includes a human operational plan, because automated defenses are not enough when attacks evolve. Teams need dashboards that show load, token usage, error rates, and unusual traffic patterns. They need playbooks for what to do when usage spikes, including how to tighten limits, block abusive sources, and communicate with users. They also need post-incident analysis to understand how the attack worked and what design changes will reduce future risk. Beginners should see that this is similar to classic incident response, but with a focus on availability and cost rather than data theft. It is also a governance issue. You need clear policies for what usage is allowed and what happens when limits are exceeded. If policies are unclear, defenders may hesitate, and hesitation is costly during availability incidents. A well-prepared system can respond quickly and calmly, preserving service for legitimate users while limiting abuse. To close, denial of service risks in AI systems include classic traffic flooding, but they also include model-specific attacks like input and output bloat, tool call amplification, and cost bombs that aim to drain resources and budgets. These risks exist because model workloads can be expensive and variable, and because helpful systems can be manipulated into doing excessive work. Resilience comes from bounding work with input and output limits, enforcing rate limits and quotas, prioritizing and queuing requests, and performing early cost checks to reject abusive patterns before expensive processing begins. It also comes from protecting dependencies with safeguards that prevent cascades, and from having operational monitoring and response plans for spikes and evolving attacks. The beginner mindset to carry forward is that availability is a security property, and in AI systems it is tightly linked to cost. When you design for bounded work and graceful degradation, you make the system harder to overwhelm and easier to keep useful when the real world gets noisy and adversarial.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.